All right, got it. All right. Welcome everyone to the CHEJ training call on using your right to know and EPCRA, Emergency Planning Community Right to Know issue. This is something that I have used for many years. Back in 2011 was the first I met Chief, and I've been working with him ever since. The chief has graciously agreed to help us with this presentation or do the presentation himself. Chief is a retired battalion chief from the Youngstown Fire Department. He is also a hazmat specialist. He was trained by the FBI, the CIA, or I'm not sure about the CIA, but I know he was trained by the FBI and Homeland Security. You may also recognize Chief. He has been on a lot of news stations and media regarding the East Palestine rail incident. And so, Chief, I'm going to let you take it from there.
Okay, thank you for the introduction and the opportunity to present. I figure this is pretty timely. We're now approaching almost 40 years. We're a year shy of 40 years from the Bhopal and Institute West Virginia incidents that started all of this. And in my experience, time makes you forget things, and a lot of things are being forgotten, as has reared its ugly head, unfortunately, in the East Palestine issue. So without further ado, let's start the PowerPoint presentation. We'll start going over some stuff. Hopefully for a lot of people, this is going to be a review. If not, any questions, like I said, save them and we'll address them. After Bhopal, India, and following the similar release of methyl isocyanate down in Institute, West Virginia, we decided as a nation that we're going to do something about this wild west of chemical production. Prior to this, the buzzword was better living through chemistry, and we realized that a lot of these chemicals weren't good. So once Bhopal happened and you had over 3,000 people killed and thousands of more injured, we had a similar release. The industry in the United States says, no, this wouldn't happen here. Then right after they did it, they said that it happened. So we went ahead and we started instituting laws, and some of them were called the EPCRA laws. There are 3 programs mandated by EPCRA, Section 301, 312, and 313. They created reporting regulations. They created state emergency response protocols, and they created local emergency planning committees, and they also were the genesis for local hazmat teams. Go ahead. Congress passed the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act, or EPCRA, as Title III of the Superfund Amendments and Reauthorization Act of SARA. The Superfund Amendment was to handle places like Love Canal and a lot of these cleanup sites that industry left once they went bankrupt, and they left these huge plots of land full of chemicals that had to be cleaned up, and they were no longer in business and there was no money to clean them up. Go ahead. Enacted October 17th, 1986, EPCRA is a separate freestanding law designed to address concerns about the effect of chemical releases on communities. That was the big thing. We wanted to put power back into the people's hands. People didn't know what was in their neighborhoods, and that was not right. People were living right next door to these waste sites, and nobody knew what was going on there. They were living on top of them in the case of Love Canal, and they didn't know what was going on. So people have, the inalienable thing is people have a right to clean air, clean water, and a safe place to live. And that was being denied them, and in some cases today still is. EPCRA expanded the role of citizens and state and local governments in the emergency planning process. It emphasized the importance of emergency response planning and training programs, of which I'm here because of that. It contains provisions for the emergency preparation and chemical risk management in local communities, and it ensures that the general public has access to information about chemicals present in their communities. Go ahead. EPCRA has two main subtitles. Subtitle A, which requires the development of comprehensive local emergency response plans for chemical release situations, and it imposes reporting regulations and requirements for chemical releases. Go ahead. Subtitle B imposes new community right to know reporting requirements that make virtually all chemical inventory information available to the public, with a caveat, that caveat being the fracking industry. Sections 301, 312, and 313 essentially is made up of those following three subsections in the EPCRA laws. Go ahead. Section 103 calls on the community to develop plans for responding to the release of any hazardous chemical from a nearby facility. It requires the creation of state and local planning committees that work with the industry to develop response plans. Basically, your local EMAs are the warehouse for all this information, and they also have what's called emergency response plans and their annexes. Those plans should be available to you upon request, and they are supposedly updated on a regular 4 to 5 year basis to make sure that they're current. A lot of these things have slipped through the cracks, as we have found, and they're not being updated. And it's important for you to understand and hold these people's feet to the fire, because you're paying for them to do nothing. And your EMA's job is to make sure that these things are current. Phone numbers haven't changed, the whole 9 yards. Go ahead. Initial notification. Owner and operators are required to submit material safety data sheets. They've since changed to SDSs, safety data sheets, or a chemical list for each new hazardous chemical, or EHS, emergency health substances. They submit this to CERC, to the LEPC. The CERC is your state emergency planning committee. LEPC is your local planning committee, emergency planning committee, and local fire departments within 90 days after a chemical is first present at the facility above the threshold level. One-time requirement per facility. The threshold was approximately 55 gallons. And the reason why they did that is because you would have every supermarket, every gas station, every store that sold a quantity of a chemical reporting. And I know in Youngstown, we would get, just within the confines of the city, about 150 to 200 reports, tier 2 reports. That would have been like tripled if they had to report everything that, in small quantity. Go ahead. 312 contains community right to know provisions that grant local emergency response personnel and public access to the information on chemicals present in local facilities. Chemical data must also be included in material safety data sheets under the Occupational Safety and Health Administration regulations. Go ahead. 313 requires companies to provide the environmental protection agencies and state officials with an actual accounting of toxic chemicals that are routinely released into the environment. That would be like your factories. That would be like your steel mills that are effluent stuff through their stacks. Those kind of things, they have to be reported if you're going to be regularly releasing them. Go ahead. EPCRA mandates the establishment of state emergency response. That was your genesis of the hazmat teams. Commissions, or CERC, state emergency response commissions that are overseen by the governor. It looks at the state implementation for EPCRA. Go ahead. Each CERC must designate emergency planning districts and appoint local emergency planning committees, LEPCs, for each district. Each LEPC must write an emergency plan for its district, and the CERC makes recommendations and reviews each plan under its jurisdiction. In the state of Ohio, they're divided up per county. Each county has its own EMA, and each EMA is responsible to set up a local emergency planning committee and create these response plans that are reviewed by the state, approved, and then put in. They're also, like I said before, required to routinely review these plans and do exercises to ensure that these plans are relevant. Go ahead. Each LEPC emergency plan must include facilities covered in transportation routes, responsible personnel, and notification procedures. It's important, the second part of the first sentence, facilities covered and transportation routes, they're important, especially if you happen to have a lot of trains that go through, and if you happen to have freeway intersects, because there's quite a bit of chemical in transit that most people take little notice of because we just don't pay attention. Go ahead. Methods for estimating releases in areas are likely to be, you have to, in these plans, you have to look at the methods in releasing for areas likely to be affected, emergency equipment, facility evacuation plans, trainings, and exercises. A lot of this stuff probably in your LEPCs have not been updated. I found that, the technology is changing so rapidly that some of the plans that were put in place 4 years ago aren't really relevant anymore. The releases change, how, the way they function. For example, a lot of your wastewater treatment plants are using chlorine primarily to purify the sewage. A lot of them have been moving away from chlorine. They've been going to utilizing other methods like UV light and stuff like that to cut down on the amount of chlorine they've got to use. So these things have changed, and a lot of times this stuff doesn't make it to your LEPCs. Go ahead. All companies are required to report to CERC the identity of each facility containing any substance on the EPA's list of EHS substances or extremely hazardous substances in the amount that meets or exceeds the established threshold planning quality. Like I said, the threshold quality is about 55 gallon drum. Some more toxic stuff is lower, but that's a real defined amount and real defined quantity of stuff. Like if you're dealing with cyanides and stuff like that, the threshold is a lot lower. Go ahead. The reporting requirements, the affected facility must provide information necessary for developing and implementing state and local emergency response plans, designate an emergency response coordinator, and assist the LEPC in developing local emergency plans. And this is important because in today's society where everything is expensive, if a facility moves into, say, my district and they're going to start producing a chemical, I have to be able to budget within my budget to make sure I can detect and mitigate any situation that might pop up. So in order for them to do the job that they've got to do and for me to do the job that I've got to do, we have to talk to each other and we have to know what's going on so I can prepare for an emergency in their facility and they can prepare for us to come and help them out. The alpha and omega of those two are on the alpha end in Youngstown, we had Marathon Gas. They have a tank farm. They would train with us on a regular basis. We knew all their chemical inventories. We knew if somebody in their plant was having a bad day. They trained with us. They took incident command with us. They informed us with everything. Other end of that spectrum is fracking. You go there, they don't know anything. They don't want to tell you anything. They don't want to say anything. So how am I supposed to respond to an incident like that when I don't know a darn thing about what's going on in their plant? So you now have these two ends of the spectrum. Go ahead. EPCRA established reporting requirements to provide information on hazardous chemicals for affected communities. It contains requirements to inform the general public and communities about toxic chemical releases. Facilities are responsible for notifying the CERC that the facility is subject to the emergency plan requirements of EPCRA. Again, what they're talking about, again, through the EMAs, if you have a release and you want to shelter in place, your EMAs can instruct the local television companies to put a crawl out that something's going on in such a place, filter in place, or don't drink the water, or boil your water. This is what they're talking about, and this is what EPCRA assures that is supposed to happen, usually. Go ahead. What are you supposed to report? Step one, within 60 to 90 days of having an EHS or other hazardous chemical, the facility must provide written notification that it's there. They must include the company's name, address, list of VHSs or hazardous chemicals. Step 2, they must do an annual chemical inventory report or site map. It's supposed to be due annually. In Youngstown, we started receiving them at the beginning of January, and they have till March 1st to report everything there. And it kind of got onerous with the hard copy reporting, but you still had to go to the files and look at the files and make sure that they're reporting and nothing has changed. If there's anything changed in production modes, CERC has created a tailored form called Tier 2 reporting forms or Tier 2 submits. Oil and gas and drilling phase uses Tier 2 submit software. Go ahead. So let's look at a Tier 2 report. The product we're going to be talking about is brine. It's 1,000 gallons. Conversion factors, specific gravity, it's all the physical and chemical properties should be appearing on the SDS sheets. Their calculation is that they have 1,000 gallons of brine times 1.2 specific gravity of brine, which means gravity. The gravity of the brine is on the saline level. It's more salinous than water, and your water usually weighs about 8.34 pounds per gallon. So you've got approximately 10,008 pounds of brine. Go ahead. So what these people will do is, this is what you're looking at, is a Tier 2 reporting form. Covers the year from January 1 to December 31st of 2012. And as you can look, it tells you where the street is, who the company is, what the latitude and longitude is of the company, which is really not that important for the normal person, but for me, it allows me to go into computer-aided software and plot and plume things. It gives you contact numbers. It gives you the chemical trade names, what it is, what's its physical hazard, immediate, acute, delayed, chronic. It gives you more information, where it's located, how long do they have it, how much do they carry, for how long. Next one. Again, you're looking at crude oil, storage locations, physical properties, all the way down enzyme G and E. And the interesting part with all of this is all of these things contain trade names, and they give you, sometimes if you get it, you give you general properties. However, a lot of this stuff, especially coming out of the oil and gas industry, a lot of it doesn't tell you exactly what it is. So it's very hard for someone like me to calculate how I'm going to mitigate if I don't really know what the chemical formulas are on these things. Go ahead, next one. A gelling agent, again, all they're telling me is it's a fire hazard. It has immediate and delayed chronic problems. But if I look up GW-3LDF, I'm not going to get a chemical formula. So how do I mitigate that? Does it sink in the water? Does it float in the water? Is it lighter than air? Is it heavier than air? Is it double bonded? Is it triple bonded? None of that information is available. They do this purposefully. Go on to the next one. Propants, and again, XLW-32. Again, just general, it's flammable. It has an acute and chronic health effect. You're going to have it in the well, but again, no real solid information for me to look at. Go ahead. The reporting requirements or facilities subject to EPCRA release notification requirements must notify the LEPC and CERC in the event of a release of a reportable quantity. What are they supposed to tell them about? Any extremely hazardous substance, any comprehensive environmental response, Compensation and Liability Act hazardous substance. They have a period of time at which they're supposed to do it. It's supposed to be within a week of the release. Usually they do it. Some people, believe it or not, are not knowledgeable with that. We had a wastewater treatment plant that we had a release of chlorine, and they just decided that they were never going to tell CERC or LEPC about it. And if it wasn't for the fact that I filed a incident action plan and and my paperwork, nobody would have caught on about it at the state. They had a fine, they had to pay it, but in Ohio, the fines are pretty lax. Go ahead. Hazardous substance releases must be reported for immediate oral notification and subsequent written report within 30 days. Again, that's what I was talking about. I notify the EPA pretty much on everything that is a release of anything that is a chemical. So I kind of handled the first part when I was a hazmat chief. Now, the part that I told you that the company, the wastewater treatment plant, didn't report, they didn't write that secondary report to CERC and to the local LEPC within that 30-day period, and they got gigged. Again, what happened was I filed my report. I, of course, sent that to CERC, and I sent that to the local area emergency planning committee. And they're like, okay, we haven't got anything from these people. And then they did what they had to do. Go ahead. Verbal notification within 30 minutes or upon discovery or its knowledge. Verbal notification must be made to jurisdictional fire departments, the Ohio Emergency Response Hotline, and the local emergency planning committee emergency coordinator. Usually, when they call the fire department, when I get there, I make the phone call to the EPA, and I make a phone call because most of your hazmat teams are based out of your EMAs. They're notified vis-a-vis the fact that I called for a hazmat team and it got dispatched. So those are usually handled by the fire departments. Go ahead. So let's take a look at an actual release. Stat oil well fire in Monroe County. This is probably one of your best scenarios of no reporting, no information. This was a wellhead that caught fire in Monroe County. They were doing fracking. This was the fire that greeted the first responders when they got there. Go ahead. This was kind of like the after effects, everything that got burned that was there. All that empty space used to be filled with something that burnt. Go ahead. Those were sand kings. They held sand. There was everything to the right are pressurizers they were using to frack the well. Those burnt as well. Go ahead. Those were things that didn't get hurt. The control building off to the left there didn't get touched, but everything in front of it did. Interesting enough, the control building had no MSDS or SDS sheets when the fire department got there, and they did not get any chemical information for 3 days. And even when they got it, it was incomplete. So the problem that you have as a first responder is how do you deal with this? I'm not going to put my guys into that without knowing what I'm dealing with. And go to the next one, and you can start seeing some of the problems that you're going to encounter that you don't know about. Go ahead. You have rows and rows of fire. They're trying to put the fire out, and in amongst all of that are the chemicals that they're using to frack. Go ahead. There's your wellhead. You don't know if it's leaking because it's under pressure. Go ahead. You had aluminum tankers that were filled with stuff. You had as a hydrochloric acid tanker that nobody knew about. So if there's chemical totes, go to the next one. There's the hydrochloric tanker that was burnt. So where did all that stuff go? It went into the environment. So how can I deal with that when I don't know what's there? And that's what CERC and EPCRA and all this other stuff is about. And that is the problem that you have when you're dealing with things like, the oil and gas industry that's not reporting. Go ahead. Here you have the one tanker. You could clearly see it's marked with a placard. It's a corrosive, and there was no MSDS sheets, and all that stuff was on fire, and you can't tell. So without proper reporting, and this is the omega end of it, without proper reporting, nobody could do anything. And the subsequent loss there was it poisoned probably all the wildlife in Possum Creek that went down into the Ohio River, put a plume down the river. Nobody notified anything about it. No one notified anything about it because they weren't required. That plume went down through the Ohio River and probably got put into the intakes of some people to draw water from the Ohio River. So it's not really friendly when you're not reporting. Go ahead. Next one. See, there's tractors. These things are melted. There's a lot of heat there. So, again, if I don't know what I'm getting my guys into, I'm not going to put my guys into there, and it's just going to exacerbate the environmental damage. Go ahead. Here's a picture of totes. One of them was flammable. We don't know, other than the fact that it was flammable, what's in it. And next picture. That's what they look like after they burned up. Where did it all go? Into the ground, into a Possum Creek, down the Ohio River. Again, when you don't report, when you don't utilize your CERC or your LEPCs, when you allow your state and federal governments to weaken the laws, these are the disasters that you end up with on the other end. Go ahead. And that's the wellhead area again. You could see in the middle there, 218.2, those were the pressurizers. They burned up. 15 was the sand castles. That was filled with sand and proppant. 4 and 5 had the totes. Those had the chemicals in it. The areas marked 2, 9, 16, 12 had diesel fuel and all kind of other unknown chemicals. And I really don't think they ever found out totally what was in all of that because they could never recover the lists. Go ahead. This was the after the fact public notice of what happened. The wellhead itself was Stat Oil, who was the applicant. The wellhead itself was the Eisenbarth well pad. They kind of gave an overview. The well pad failed, filling portions of an unnamed tributary to the Opossum Creek. It's telling you after the fact, excuse me, but again, after the fact is too late. So without proper reporting through CERC and LEPCs, these firemen had no way of understanding what was going on, and they had no way of stopping the resulting damage. And it's kind of crazy because if you don't report, your first responders don't know. If they don't know, they can't stop the damage, which makes it more expensive on your end to clean up the mess if they make you clean up the mess. Go ahead to the next one. So how do we fight this? How do we fight this? We got to have our right to know teams. People have to understand that they have a basic right to know what's going on. So what's the most important tool that we can have as public for the right to know? Go ahead. Every 3 or 4 years, the Department of Transportation would put out an emergency response guidebook. They're now available through an app. They're free and you can download them. You can just go to your app store if you happen to have a smartphone and download the emergency response guidebook. The current one is the 2020. I just downloaded the new update and they have just totally gotten rid of dates on them. They just notify you when there's a new update and you download it. Go ahead. Once you open the app up after it's downloaded, it'll tell you what's changed on the what new. It'll tell you how to search, whether you're going to use a UNID number. We'll explain that later. Search by an image. What does the tractor trailer look like that's carrying it? You can browse, or you could do reference materials, or you could type in, the name. Go ahead. Next one. Just so happens we typed in vinyl chloride here, apropos, and it gives you the name, and right underneath it you see the UNID number. If it was on a vehicle that was placarded, the number would be 1086. Once you open that up, go ahead. Next one. You will get guide 116P for flammable gases and unstables. It's going to tell you all the basic physical properties. Now, let me remind you, this is basic. And that's all we should care about, okay? It gives you just the basic stuff you need to keep yourself safe and report this correctly. It gives you the information. Plus, it also gives you on the bottom your health effects if you get exposed to it. Vapors may cause dizziness and asphyxiation. Toxic if inhaled in high concentrations. Contact with gas or liquefied gas may cause burns, severe injury, frostbite. A lot of things that people in East Palestine have already experienced. Go ahead. They tell you how to take care of the public safety end of it. Now, at the bottom of the public safety, where it says many gases are heavier in air and spread around the ground and collect in low and confined areas according to source, that's where you stop. Okay. If we see something and we look it up and we find it, you're going to want to keep people away. You're going to warn them, don't go there. You're going to want to stay upwind and uphill. That means that you want the wind to your back. You don't want the wind into your face. And that's where we stop. We make sure the authorities are called, the whole 9 yards, because now you start getting into anything down there, you're now into first responder information. You're not going to put protective clothing on. You're going to get out of Dodge. You're going to use what we call the rule of thumb. The rule of thumb is if you can put your thumb up and not cover the entire incident, you are too close. Keep going. So most of this stuff after that, up till you get to the first aid part, like if you happen to have somebody that's been exposed, that's all first responder stuff. And, nothing that I want people here to deal with. Go ahead. Next one. All right, placards and UNID numbers. Again, these are your friends, and they're going to have pictures of that in the guide, in your downloaded guidebook. You're going to see actual pictures of rail cars, actual pictures of, or I should say, drawing pictures of rail cars, drawing pictures of trucks, and you're going to see these placards. All of these placards mean something. There's 9 separate classes. And when I talk about a UNID number, that orange placard that you see sitting at the bottom, 3082, that's called a UNID number. They're universal. They've pretty much made them worldwide. All these numbers all mean the same things anywhere in North America. And now they're starting to pull in Europe and some of these other countries. So your placard should basically give you an idea of what you're dealing with. If you see a red placard with flame on it, it's flammable. If you see a green one, it's non-flammable. You see the propeller and the yellow and white, it's radioactive. If you see a solid yellow, that's an oxidizer. Just seeing these placards should tell you what you're dealing with. Go ahead. Next one. Again, here are the 9 classes. And each class has a subclass. Like if you take a look at explosives, you have an explosive 1.4, 1.5, 1.6, an explosive class 1. Same thing with gasoline. It's divided up in gasoline, flammables, combustion, and fuel oils. Now, the way they determine those is pretty much what their ignition temperatures are. So, if something readily ignites, it's extremely flammable. It's combustible. It's a fuel. If it's takes a while, like diesel fuel, you got to heat it up before it catches fire. You're looking at fuel oil. And again, we go through the poisons, the radioactives, the dangerous mixed loads, the whole 9 yards. Next one. So how do these chemicals get here? Well, you've got to pay attention to your methods of transit. Here you have rail, one of the most common, one of the most common methods of transport in the United States is by rail. What you're looking at here is what's called a unit train. It's carrying fuel oil, diesel, not diesel, but crude oil. And what I mean by a unit train is that entire train, which could be 150 cars long, has one chemical, and that's all they're transporting. All that train is a long train of oil that they're transporting to get refined. Next one. The next most common method of transport is by truck. Trucks are kind of tricky because some will carry all of one kind of thing. Some will carry a mixed load. UPS, a lot of the other freight companies that carry mixed freight, they're real good for that. But all of these have one thing in common. Whatever they're carrying, there should be a safety data sheet with the driver telling you what's in there if it's over 55 gallons. Go ahead. The ones that are the most dangerous, the ones that strike the fear of God into me are these little things. They are brine haulers coming from the oil and gas fields. They don't have to have MSDS shades. They don't have to be placarded. They just show up, fill up, and then drive through your neighborhoods to the injection wells where they get rid of their stuff. These strike the fear of God into me because they do travel past schools. They do travel through neighborhoods to get to injection wells that are buried in mostly poor minority, or the triple Yahtzee poor minority communities. And the drivers don't know what they've got. They don't have any safety data sheets. They have nothing. And it's not just brine. If they're coming from the frac wells, it's not just brine, but a whole hodgepodge of chemicals that they've used that have come back up through the well. And most, if not all, of this brine is highly radioactive. You've got radium-226 and radium-228 in it. So you're dealing with a real ticking time bomb, shall we say. And most of these truck drivers, if they're smart and they have experience, don't do this job. The people that are driving these are usually young drivers that have just got their licenses and have no idea what they're hauling, because as soon as they figure out what they're hauling and they start to suffer some ill health effects from it, they go on and they move on to another job. Go ahead. Now, it's easy for us to note fixed facilities. Like I said, in Youngstown, we have what you see there on the upper left. That is a tank farm. It carries gasoline, it carries diesel fuel, it carries methanol. There's a whole bunch of fuels. These are easy. Yep, that's gas. The ones down there, tubes, they're carrying something pressurized, mostly propane. So these facilities are very easy to see, very easy to understand that they've got something that can reach out and hurt you. The ones you got to worry about, go ahead, next one, is facilities like this. They're inside of a building. They may have NFPA diamonds outside that indicate what they've got, but for the most part, they're not going to have a ton of placards on the outside announcing that they have got all of this stuff. You're seeing cylinders of gas there. You're seeing, you look right on the lower right-hand corner, you've got a corrosive there. You look to the left of that, more corrosives. This thing is loaded with chemicals, and you don't see it. You may see the NFPA diamond that tells you that it's got flammables and corrosives inside, but you will not see anything on the outside outwardly telling you that this place is dangerous. These are the facilities that the CERC and LEPCs are the most valuable to you with. They will tell you what is in these facilities. They will tell you what is carried in there, and you have the right to know. It was one of the issues that popped up in the East Palestine train derailment. They kept the information from the people. And by the people, I mean the news media were there to relay the information to the people. And for days, they weren't saying anything. That's how I got involved, because I knew how to tell what was in them, and they weren't saying that. By rights, everybody has a right to know what's in these facilities if it's not an oil and gas facility. Go ahead. There's a lot of things that we have to change. Like I said, it's been almost 40 years since all of this stuff started to happen. And over a period of 40 years, things kind of fall out. Right after 9/11, we started to gear up and build hazmat teams and build response teams. And we started to talk in between agencies. And now, 17, 18 years out, all of that's going away. The funding is going away. The training is going away. All of this stuff is going away. And it's the same thing with CERC laws. We enacted CERC laws to prevent disasters, but yet in East Palestine, we had a situation that CERC should have prevented. People should have known that these trains were going through there. They should have known what's on there. Information should have been forthcoming to the people. Evacuations, which should have been part of the emergency response plan, should have been enacted almost immediately. None of that was. And why? Because people have forgot. I kept telling the news media when they were saying, well, you know, we're having these press conferences, but they're not telling us what's in there. I said, tell them that under CERC laws, under EPCRA, they have to tell you. It's not an oil and gas issue. They have to tell you. And, you can only reinforce this so much. So,
Okay, thanks, Chief. I want to take a little bit of time to jump to some questions. I think we'll take a couple of questions from the chat, and then if you have a question that you would like to ask Chief, you want to raise your hand. So Sharon, do you want to go over the question list, or who wants to do?
I think Hunter has to do it because I can't see the chat.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Hunter, can you do that for us?
Yeah, I'll only do like a small handful. So first one from Carrie Ziegler. She's asking, or they, how do we know if an emergency plan is needed? I live by a lot of industrial sites, but don't know if there is a certain chemical or process that would require this.
well, the simple answer to your question is, you call your local EMA, who should be warehousing, or your local fire department for that fact, who should be warehousing the tier 2 reports, and find out what that facility has.
Right.
And if they say they don't have anything for it, go look around the facility itself. And if you happen to see an exterior NFPA diamond, it looks like a placard, and it has 4 little quarters in it. And the bottom one is white, and then you have red and other colors. Then it does have a chemical in it. It's not uncommon to find that some of this stuff has slipped through the cracks, especially in areas that are taken care of with volunteer fire departments. So if you can't get a good answer from your fire department, call your county EMA. Find out if they do any tier 2 reporting at all. That's the first 2 places I would look.
Okay, we have one from Elaine Tanner. Working in an area on the edge of Charleston, West Virginia, not too far from the Institute. We suspect a release of two H2S wells leaked and made many people sick. We also suspect benzene. It's undocumented old wells, several orphaned wells on this mountain. Creek runs up into the Elk River, just up from American Water's intake on the Elk River. What do you suggest we should be testing for?
Well, benzene is one of the big ones. Just a little bit of benzene can really screw up your water system. So you're going to want to try to test for the benzenes. H2S, hydrogen disulfide. You can test that with hydrogen sulfides, but I would probably go with a volatile, what's called a VOC, volatile organic chemical meter, and try to test for everything that may be coming out of those plants if you're going to do testing. Again, I would also call the local LEPC and find out exactly what they have and what kind of tier 2 reporting they're doing, because that might be one of many chemicals or 2 of many chemicals that they actually do have there.
One more question before we move on to hams. Ginger Sanders asks, does this apply to nuclear industry spills of radioactive products like tritium?
Tritium, yeah. The only people that are exempt from reporting is the oil and gas industry. They have bought their way into so many pockets that unless you can really catch them, and it's hard, and Teresa can echo that, they really don't have to tell you anything they're doing, and they don't. I did a documentary on that particular stat well fire, and one of the things they did not do is we never really knew for sure everything was there, and they kept telling everybody everything they were using was safe. But yes, if you're dealing with a DOE, the Department of Energy thing, they have to abide by the regulation, federal regulations, which is kind of interesting because the oil and gas with the radium-226 and radium-228 is dealing with just as radioactive substances, and they're totally exempt. They can dump it in your waste landfills, and they can inject it underground and totally exempt. If they're the DOE and dealing with stuff like it would be costing them hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars per truckload to deal with that stuff.
Let's move on to Teresa Landrum has her hand up. And if we don't answer any other comments, what we'll do is we can follow up in an email later on. Correct, Teresa?
Correct.
Yes,
Thank you for this opportunity to speak. And Chief, thank you for the very informative presentation. My question is about notification. Why is there on the books that they have to take so long, 30 to 90 days before they inform somebody or a community of a dangerous release?
Originally, that was done so that it gave them time to research and put together a packet that was legally correct. Now people are just starting, with computers. This was set up before computers, so you actually had to open up a Hawley's book and go through your industrial hygiene, and you had to check everything out, and so they needed the time. Now it's all computer, and that's just in there just so they can mess around and take the time. They really should be looking at shortening that, because with computer aided management of emergency operations, these people can print up an MSDS sheet in a matter of minutes, where it would take them days upon days to actually fill out everything and make sure they're correct. Because when you fill out these tier 2 reporting forms, you want to fill out for the worst case scenarios. So you'd have to look at 3 different studies and then find the worst of the 3 and then put it in there. Computer aided management of that stuff has made it a lot easier nowadays.
Thank you.
I just want to deal with this real quickly. Chief is, I'm a grassroots activist, hellraiser. So if I suspected that there was a release, then I would immediately be calling the agencies to find out if they had been notified. And then I would call them again to find out if they had been notified. Like an hour later, I would keep calling them until they were notified. And then they only have 30 days to report the final report. So you need to be calling them every day. Make a pest out of yourself every day. Call them every day.
And I echo Teresa's concerns, because that's a big question of us. If a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, and
Right.
it doesn't make a sound.
Right.
If they can get away with releasing something and nobody notices it,
Right.
they get away with it.
Hunter, do you see that Dale has his hand up?
Yes, go ahead, Dale.
Okay. Sorry.
I'm Dale Feek from Oregon. In 2015, I brought up to the county commissioners that we need to have this local emergency planning, and it took until 2022 before we finally got a countywide local emergency planning committee, and it is operational with bylaws. In that, we'll have 40 site-specific plans with plumes developed, and this is from the emergency planners from Washington County that are doing this. And then we have a statewide conference now, April 18th through the 20th. So this is very helpful to have this program today. Intel's a big, we have the semiconductor industry in our county. Fluorides are a big deal, fluorines, and they have all kinds of derivatives of that. When you get the yearly stuff that has to be submitted to the state fire marshal, the amount of chemicals that are related to those fluorines is just amazing to me. So you have ammonia fluoride, you have sulfuric acid, you have all kinds of huge numbers of toxic corrosive chemicals. I'm coming up with a question here. And I was told in the way of transportation, there's a common site that most of these chemicals go to. And when I go around there, I don't see where there's placards on those. So I guess I need to start pursuing then in our local emergency planning, the people that are doing this, why aren't those placards? Is that correct? So that's a question. Okay, so that's a question. And then I found out you can have risk management plans. Intel, you have to answer 5 questions on those state fire marshal forms they fill out. And if they answer, I think 4 or 5 questions, then you have to have a plan at the federal reading room level. And you have to go to a federal reading room, and the closest one is ours in Seattle. So I went to that and read the sites, this risk management plans for the worst case scenarios for Intel in New Mexico, Arizona, and Oregon. And it was interesting to me that Intel had a summary, 3-page summary, the same for all of those states, right? So that is another option, though, is risk management plans at the federal reading level to inform more of the local emergency planning group, right? So I guess the question is, it's questions, and then anything you can do to help us at the state and local level, I'd appreciate. Because we have a county that has excellent emergency planning directors, and they're into this seriously, and they have plumes developed so far about 28 of these sites in our county, which is great. What I'm really pushing for is to get those people in our county and have a website on the county so they know how to access those plumes and those plans.
Okay, Chief, can you answer the two questions that he asked about? Is it up to him to, excuse my voice, does he need to be the one to put the pressure on?
Well, the public has to put the pressure on.
Right.
My question back is, if some of these places don't have LEPCs, what the hell have they been doing since 1984? And the other thing is, they have to have a 4-year cycle of tabletop and live exercises. What's been going on?
Right.
And it's the public that's got to put the pressure on them. And
Right, and if one of them tell you that they don't have a plan, you inform that they are in violation of federal law.
yes,
Because they are in violation of federal law.
The advantage that we had is we had a former Coast Guard upper officer was involved in emergency planning, and he took this upon himself, and he ended up helping getting written state laws to implement the local emergency planning committee regulations. And he's been very dogged doing this. I mean, so we're very fortunate to have his level, but it was also a political problem because other counties have tried it and they got in trouble and there was pushback on it. So they never got the local emergency plan. And at the state level, it was an unfunded mandate. So the state made it, the whole state was a local emergency planning committee. So it was unfunded. And so, but now we have at least 3 or 4 in the state of Oregon that are county based. And Washington County, I think, is going to be the top of the heap in this. But I'm the only citizen. The other people that are industry people that have responsibility for the emergency of their industries, like other semiconductor people that provide Intel chemicals, right? And, but you got the sewage treatment plant, but they're required to be a member. But I'm the only citizen so far. But now I got Mike Gallagher here listening to this, and we got Fawn Hosey from Oregon that are here listening to this. So we got to have political pressure.
Well, and
Pressure.
here's the one thing I think that we can see out of this, the group of people that's gathered here, ask yourself a question. Does this concern, am I concerned about this? Have I checked into my local emergency planning, my state emergency planning? Do you want to have another call, just to talk about what you can do? Like I said, I have used the EPCRA for years. I actually filed a petition against the state of Ohio with the US EPA claiming they were in violation of the federal supremacy laws. And US EPA agreed with me. So there's a lot of things that people can do, but industry and the state agencies don't want you to know this stuff. They don't want you to use your right to know. Get in their face. Tell them you want all of this information. Get it, get in their face. And of course, like I said, I'm an activist, so I don't have a problem getting in people's faces. But you can do it politely. That's okay with me.
Well, what I've done though is the person, this commander of the Coast Guard, that's emergency director and now semi-retired, but still working on these plans, site-specific plans. We made an agreement that we wouldn't go to the media until he got it done. We are to the point where we are now there.
Well, that's great, Dale, but not everyone has a person like that. So to me, if you get information, and you want to take it to the media, Godspeed. Do it. Do
I
it.
agree.
You
I
need
agree.
to-
The question that I have is, I remember hearing something, you may want to look into this. Oregon is charging chemicals in transit trucks a surcharge for hazmat teams. Hazmat teams function under LEPCs and CERC. Now, if they're functioning, then you have to have active information being fed into that system. So I would find out, I think Oregon is one of them. I remember there's a list of a bunch of, because we're looking at funding in the state of Ohio. I also sat on the state hazmat WMD Technical Advisory Committee, and we're looking at funding sources for the state of Ohio. And Oregon and Washington and a few of them came up that did some funding. Find out what they're doing with the funding, because if a hazmat team shows up and you don't have an active LEPC, they're kind of like poking in the dark there. So something's got to be going on, and you've got to tune into it. And the other thing too is, if you're looking to do modeling, plotting, and pluming, Cameo, CAMEO, it's computer-aided management for emergency operations. You can download it for free. It's government software. And with that in the suite comes Aloha, aerial locations of hazardous atmospheres, and bit plot maps that you can put in you can download maps for your cities. You can download your county maps. You can download census maps. And that also helps you plan better as a committee if you're totally citizen driven.
I think let's go ahead and do one more question, because I see Carrie has raised her hand, and after that, we can go ahead and end the call. So Carrie, what was your question?
Yeah, so I live by a bunch of industrial sites. At times, we suspect that there's been some kind of a spill as residents and citizens. And so I've called the EPA's hotline, where a resident can call it for a concern. But then they have stated that all they can do is really take my statement. And then they asked me if I've contacted the local fire department. I say yes, but that they won't do anything unless the local fire department believes that there's an issue. But the problem is that our local fire department believes that all the companies that are around us are in compliance, and therefore they're not going to go out and investigate anything. So is there any way that if we have reason to believe that something has happened, that we can bypass the fire department or something like that? I'm not really sure what there is, but I just feel like there's no way that the fire department is our stop.
Do you have what kind of form of government do you have? Do you have like trustees? Are you like an incorporated city? What?
Well, we're a city of East Point, Georgia.
All right, then you would have councilmen, correct?
Yes.
You have councilmen for each particular district, correct?
Yes.
Bother them. Trust me.
Yeah.
As a fire chief, I don't know how many times I got phone calls to go out and check something from various. You just keep bothering them. You've got to be a pain in the patoot, because these companies, they try to blow things off, and at some point in time, these councilmen, 3 o'clock in the morning, you smell something, call your councilman. 2 in the afternoon, call your councilman. Sunday at church, call your councilman. Eventually, they're going to get tired of it, and they're going to call somebody like me, who's going to get tired of getting called out all the time, and go find out what the heck's going on. Fortunately for my town, I was one of those people that didn't just drive by, stick my nose out the window, yeah, I don't smell nothing, I'm on my way home. I actually got out and I looked at the plants. But if you keep becoming a pain in the patoot, eventually you're going to get some action. And that, as Teresa said, you've got to be an adamant activist, because people don't want to deal with this stuff.
Yeah, we've organized, we've created an environmental collective and things like that, but it's been difficult when the tax revenue from these industries are really important to the city.
Yeah, but again, you have a right to clean air, clean water, and a safe place to live. I don't give a hoot about these people's tax, the tax revenue. If they're depriving you of that, what do you got? What do these people in East Palestine got? Norfolk Southern has deprived them of all three. You keep letting industry get away with stuff like that, and you end up like East Palestine. You've got to get involved. You've got to get a hold of your LEPCs. You got to have a presence there. You've got to, or you're going to end up. A lot of people are going to end up like East Palestine.
Right.
And I
Right.
think
Good
that's a
morning.
good note to end on.
Hello,
Well-
wait, and this is Shirley Body, and I'm a member of CHEJ, Community for Environmental Justice in Sacramento, well, actually Oakland. And it sounds like a lot of the places that are visible here in this talk needs to have a chapter there. Those are the things that we go to the legislature and fight for. So I can send whomever some information and maybe possibly have them come and help you start a chapter, branch off there, because they are
Okay.
all over the world.
Okay, thank you. We need to, honor everybody's time. So it is time to end the call. And I'm awfully sorry, we forgot to ask for questions from the people on the phone. So everybody have a great day and enjoying the sunshine if you've got it in your community.